Hi guys, so I realise I've really missed the bus on this one because most people made a review of it about 6 months ago when it was shortlisted for the Man Booker Prize, but I have only just got around to reading it now and I have some thoughts on it and I thought I would share them anyway. It's Exit West by Mohsen Hamid, and it is kind of timely that I'm making this video now because the paperback edition comes out today as I'm filming this, which is the 8th of February. I wasn't initially that enthused to read it because I heard quite a lot of mixed things in comparison to some of the other shortlisted books for the Man Booker, but I did find myself getting more and more curious and wanting to find out for myself what I thought. In a nutshell, my feelings towards it now that I've read it are just a bit underwhelmed. I certainly didn't love it, but I didn't hate it either, and I want to just talk about why I feel this ambivalence towards it, but also talk slightly more broadly about the perceptions that surrounded it due to the hype of it being on the Man Booker shortlist, and how things like its status as literary fiction affect its reception. Firstly, the book itself. It's a story about a young couple who are living in an unnamed city racked by civil war, and due to the insurrection and violence that surrounds them, they decide that they need to leave. And the USP of this book really is an element of magical realism whereby magical doors suddenly open around the world which lead people instantly to other countries. I want to start by talking about this concept because it is, at the centre of the book, and I didn't love it. I really get what Mohsen Hamid was doing. I think he was trying to focus on the more personal experiences and the choices that people make before and after they decide to travel and become refugees, rather than focusing on the travel aspect itself. However, I don't think you can tell a realistic and nuanced story of the refugee experience without taking into account the enormous part of it that is the physical and geographical travelling between locations. To me, and I know this wasn't Hamid's intention, it feels reductive to gloss over the travel aspect, which to me seems so central to what it means to be a refugee, whether it's the harrowing experience of travelling in a boat that's sinking or the feeling of communal triumph in reaching a new land with your family. It seems so integral to what it is to be a refugee that it seems wrong for it to be elided in this book. Another thing that bothered me about The Doors was that Hamid just didn't seem that committed to the idea. It only crops up a few times in the book and goes by almost unremarked by the characters. There doesn't seem to be any real narrative justification for this happening. I watched an interview with Hamid to try and get a bit more insight into why he chose this direction in the book, and his answer was really interesting. He said that his use of the doors was to kind of act as a metaphor for the collapsing physical space in a social media age, and that's really interesting, but I don't think that was reflected at all in the book. In terms of the story itself, I saw the relationship between Saeed and Nadia, the two protagonists, really as the heart of the novel, and there were some moments of nice subtlety and really poignant reflections on what it is to be in a relationship and trying to sustain any type of relationship in such tumultuous political times. However, overall I didn't think it was that successful. For a book that I perceived to be about emotional relationships, it was almost devoid of emotional resonance for me. The characters just didn't seem realistic to me. Saeed, I felt like, was just a sketch, whereas Nadia was a caricature, a robe-wearing, pot-smoking, religion-denouncing, promiscuous woman who had no actual depth. The style, I think, was deliberately distant and quite removed, and Hamid obviously had his reasons for doing this, whether it was to present the writing as some sort of Brechtian analytical model, whereby the reader is intended to look from a distance and perceive the horror in a more objective way. I don't know, but I found it unconvincing. The style itself is unadorned and journalistic, I felt, and I think this would have made more sense to me if it was Hamid's first novel having come from journalism, but it's not. I mean, he has written The Reluctant Fundamentalist, a very successful novel previously, which I've not read, to be fair, but I felt like the style was quite clumsy, and it was trying to make big points about the refugee experience and attitudes towards migrants, but I felt like it did so without any real complexity or problematising of these issues, and therefore to me it just didn't feel like real engagement with the topic. And this brings me to my main point, which isn't really about the content of the book itself, but the context in which it was published. It's an extremely timely book, and because it's about the refugee crisis, which is all over the news just now and sort of when it was published, and to me this has really impacted its engagement in the press and also its inclusion in prestigious literary prizes. Now, I do think it's great that there is engagement with this topic. I do think it's really important, and important that it's coming from a writer of colour and someone who's clearly sympathetic towards the plight of migrants. But I don't think that makes it a great book. I don't personally feel like it had enough literary merit to be considered for a prize like the Man Booker, and I don't think it should be enough to write a book that taps into the zeitgeist if it is in some way lacking. I felt his writing to be a bit clumsy and amateurish, as I said, and I know plenty of other people really didn't feel this way and they found the simplistic prose to be really arresting or actually really emotional. So I realise this is just my personal stance, but it is how I felt towards it. The other thing I wanted to talk about was the cover of the book, because I find that really indicative of the way the publisher chose to market it. Now, I own the UK hardback edition. It's actually a library book, I don't own it. But to me, the cover very much says literary fiction. It's very minimalistic, the title and author are in large print, it has neutral colours, it looks very serious and authoritative. The US hardback is a bit different, it's a bit more jaunty and colourful, it doesn't have quite the same serious vibes, but to me it still does say literary fiction. The name of the author is given as much space as that of the title, and they're really selling the fact it's written by the author of The Reluctant Fundamentalist. I don't think either of these covers accurately portray what the book is like, and I don't think it's snobbish of me to say that I don't think it's literary fiction because the writing's not amazing, but I do feel like it's misleading for the publishers to advertise it in this way, and I feel like it was a large part of the reason why I felt let down by it. If it had a cover that fitted the style of writing and the content more, I wouldn't have gone into it expecting literary fiction, and I would have appreciated it for what it was. I think the story itself is interesting and engaging, and I would have enjoyed it just as a story, as a piece of fiction, if I hadn't gone into it with such high expectations from both the fact it was shortlisted for the Man Booker and also the very serious and impressive looking cover. What I find really interesting is that the UK paperback edition is coming out, as I said, today as I'm filming this, and for me it fits the content of the book much better. It's a much more conventional paperback cover that you would find fitting in really easily in the sort of shelves and display tables at Waterstones, which to me just says that it's a really interesting story, but it's not necessarily literary. These decisions are not ones taken lightly by the publisher, and I would be fascinated to hear the conversations that led to them being made. But I do feel like they have quite deliberately chosen the covers that they have and written the blurb the way they have in order for it to be successful within the literary sphere, for it to gain high press attention from quality newspapers, and for it to be nominated for real high calibre literary prizes. I do understand the commercial reason for doing it, but I find it disheartening because to me their decisions led to me having a disappointing reading experience, whereas I don't think I had to have that experience if I was more accurately informed about what the book was before I read it. I am really glad I read this book because although I didn't love it, it did bring up these kind of thought-provoking questions for me, which I find really interesting, and I would be interested to hear your thoughts if you've read this book and specifically what edition you did read, and if your expectations going into it matched up with the reality of reading it. Because I understand everyone's experiences are different and I might be going at this from a totally different angle to anyone else. I do feel like I've been pretty harsh on this book, and I didn't hate it, I was just a bit let down by it, which is a sad feeling when you've been quite looking forward to reading a book for a long time. I've not really made any bad reviews in the past because I generally try and focus on books that I've really loved, and generally I do really love books that I read. So this is a little bit of an anomaly, but I was hoping that it wouldn't just be me slating the book, but hopefully would open a little bit more discussion about the culture that surrounds these types of literary fiction and the prize culture that kind of accumulates around them. So yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts. But anyway, I hope you did enjoy watching this video, and I'll see you very soon with more of my kind of 100 years of suffrage videos that I'm planning on making over the next few weeks. So I'll see you then. Bye bye.